Well, then, it's my privilege, actually, as the chairman of the Global Advisory Council to Venture Wave, to host this very special hour of time with you all. And I'd like to begin by welcoming the members of the Global Advisory Council for their attention and for their attendance. Time is probably one of the most precious things that we have, and you never know how much you have actually left. So for that reason, I don't propose to waste any of yours or anybody else who's tuned in. It's a privilege, actually, Kieran, for all of us, for the Global Advisory Council and the members in attendance, to have a very special guest today in Sir Ronald Cohen. Now, you are the Chief Executive of Venture Wave, a brand new opportunity out there to deal with social impact investing and to make a real difference. And from that perspective, we couldn't have a more eminent or more powerful guest than Sir Ronald Cohen, deemed to be the father of investment capital and of European venture capital, the chair of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative at Harvard Business School, and of course, Portland Trust. So Ronald Cohen's story his life story is one of real excitement, but also one of magnificent and outstanding achievement. I think in his book, the book of impact, in terms of dealing with reshaping capitalism to make a real change, is food for thought for all members of the Global Advisory Council at this private online briefing. Given as we do live in a world of uncertainty, of unprecedented challenge, and yet of unprecedented opportunity, I would like to thank you, Sir Ronald, for taking the time to give of your vast experience and knowledge, and indeed some reassurance and encouragement to members of this Global Advisory Council of Venture Wave, who really do want to make a difference in engaging with companies and investment, both to achieve the Millennium Goals of the United Nations, but also to make a real impact in this country and other locations as a consequence of socially investing for good companies to make a real difference to people's lives who will be shaped by your experience given to us and the investment from the Global Advisory Council. So without any further ado, I will ask Kieran McLaughlin, the Chief Executive, to have a conversation with Sir Ronald, and you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions thereafter. Thank you.
Well, Enda, thank you very much indeed. And if I may, on all our behalves, add my thanks and my welcome to Sir Ronald. I actually had a prep call with Sir Ronald just half an hour ago, and he insists we all call him Ronnie. So we appreciate that kindness, Ronnie, if I may, and we will address you so without fear of committing lèse majesté. So Ronnie, we're most grateful indeed. As Enda has said, Ronnie's own life story is quite extraordinary. He's a pioneer in venture capital, in private equity, a pioneer in venture philanthropy, a pioneer in social entrepreneurship, and an absolute path breaker in the world of impact investing. And in respect of impact investing in particular, I think Ronnie's activities reached their apogee so far last week, where he oversaw and has just come off the back of a very, very successful global steering group summit attended by over 1,000 attendees from 60 different countries, representing $16 trillion worth of capital that is being put to good use for the benefit of investors and for society alike. But I think in respect of Ronnie, what's as impressive and as interesting and intriguing as his achievements are his own remarkable life story and what brought him to this point. And so, Ronnie, if I may, if we could get to know you just a little more, perhaps. You know, you were a Sephardic Jewish Egyptian immigrant to the UK at the age of 11 with very barely any, if any, English. at the time. Just tell us what that experience was like. I mean, what were the obstacles you encountered, but equally, what were the opportunities that you saw?
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you very much, Enda, if I may call you, Enda, for your very kind introduction. And it's a great honor to be chatting with all of you today. And I'm actually very sorry I can't be in Ireland in person, but thank God for Zoom and for the ability we have to exchange views. So, I mean, my big concern when my family and I got kicked out of Egypt in 1957 when I was 11 and a few months old was that my stamp collection shouldn't get taken away from me, Kieran, by the customs officials and military personnel at the airport. When we arrived in Britain, it was actually a detour. We were on our way to Brazil, believe it or not, because my father's family had left Egypt a few years earlier for Brazil, but my mother had a British passport, bless her, and went to say goodbye to her brothers in London. I called up my dad, who couldn't get into the country because his passport, his Egyptian passport, had been taken away from him, and said, why don't we stay here? The kids will have so much better an education than if we go to Brazil. So my father was happy to do that, and we became British. And I was made to feel that there was a challenge. My father took me to meet the headmaster of a grammar school in North London, a school with a very undistinguished record until then, but an outstanding headmaster. And my dad said to the headmaster, look, it's not because he's my son, but if you take him, he'll be top of the class. And you can imagine, having seen my father cry on the plane on the way out of Egypt because he lost absolutely everything, and he was very much in love with Egypt. Things had changed in just a few years to his dismay, but he'd actually continued to believe that there would be a future for Jews and for all the European communities that were represented there. And so you can imagine the feeling I had that I couldn't let the side down. And so, of course, I assiduously set about trying to, rise to the challenge that he had said to me. But Britain was amazingly welcoming. There was a fantastic teacher called Richard Farley, bless him, to whom I owe a huge amount, who said to me one day, he was a history teacher, one of the most widely read people I'd ever met, or have ever met. And he said to me one day, Cohen, you should go to Oxford. Now, the school didn't prepare anybody for Oxford, and so he said, I'll prepare you. And thanks to Richard Farley, I passed the entrance exams to Oxford and went to Exeter College. So I would say my experience as a refugee was one of challenge, but also of fulfillment, Kieran.
I'm taken by your remarks about your stamp collection, and it seems to me that not only are you a philanthropist, but a great philatelist as well. But clearly you imbued or inculcated a great drive in your own character, your own mission to fulfill your father's wishes, etc. And that, of course, led you to establish Apex Partners Worldwide, through which you had great success. And again, you did so just as the VC industry was just finding its feet and finding its form. So that was a revolutionary. We're going to use the word revolution more than once in this conversation, but that was a revolutionary step to take. Again, what were your expectations? Where did you find the courage to do so? And what were the lessons learned?
Well, first of all, life has its strange ways, doesn't it? And I came back from Oxford in my third year, And I've been fortunate enough to be elected president of the Oxford Union, and Bobby Kennedy had come to speak during my term of office. And I've been hugely busy with all of that. And so I had a conversation with my dad and said, what am I going to do with a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics now? And he said, why don't you go to Harvard Business School? I've never talked of Harvard Business School with my dad or heard about it for that matter, but I probably had heard about it just because I said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. And I arrived at Harvard in 1967, very early on, after the development of the microchip, before the arrival of the PC. And something was in the air, and I'm sure you feel the same way today, Kieran, with your own investment activities, because it's a very similar period, actually. Technology was going to change everything. And some people believed big companies would be the ones leading the innovation. And the minority, a very small minority, thought that no, it was likely to be free-thinking young entrepreneurs who can think out of the box in completely different ways. And that was my reaction to it. And then I heard the business school professor, an unlikely figure, General Doriot, he'd been a French general and became one of the first venture capitalists, talk about how he had invested in a company called Digital Equipment, which was making mini computers, revolutionizing, in his view, the world of computing, because up until then, roomfuls of mainframes had been the rule, and that he'd put $70,000 into the company. It was going to be worth $100 million. So the combination of feeling that something was in the air, that this new model of venture capital was emerging, led me to decide to do that, to become a venture capitalist, basically.
And in doing so, Ronnie, I mean, obviously you were intensely focused, as you should have been, on your shareholders' interests. But when did your thinking begin to broaden to take into account stakeholder interests? And in a sense, make that move from success to significance and really take on a leadership role in the then embryonic world of impact investing?
So the reason I went into venture capital, Kieran, was in part because I knew I needed to make money to look after my parents in their old age. Yeah. But in part because I wanted to do something socially useful in the event to create jobs at the time when Britain had a very large number of unemployed. But as my career at Apax developed and we became bigger and bigger and invested in hundreds of entrepreneurs, I began to realize that far from closing the gap between rich and poor, the gap was expanding because of entrepreneurship. And sure, entrepreneurs who came from very simple backgrounds were enriching the people around them as well as themselves. But the gap just kept widening. And then I got a phone call with these ideas in my head from the Treasury in 2000 saying, would you look at the issue of poverty? And I immediately agreed to lead a task force on this subject because the government felt, this was the Blair Brown government at the time, that however much money had been thrown at poverty, very little progress had actually been made in curing all the issues that poverty creates. And when I began to look at that in detail, Kieran, and I had already told my partners at Apax a couple of years earlier that I would leave in 2005 when I got to the age of 60 to deal with social issues and the Middle East conflict. But when I began to look through the Social Investment Task Force at how our system deals with social issues, I saw governments spending a lot of money, very often in ways that didn't achieve the set objectives over very long time frames and so on. And then I saw philanthropists, a fraction of the amount of money, a small fraction of the amount of money that governments expend. But for all their good intentions, they had led to charitable organizations trying to help those in need, being small and out of money. And we wrote a report in 2000 where we basically said, look, we need financial innovation, because the reason we don't deal with poverty better is we don't bring investment to deal with it. We rely on government spending and on donations. But the vast investment markets don't connect with those who want to improve the lives of others or improve the environment, we would say today. And so the search began for a way to bring investment to tackle social issues, which led to the discovery of the social impact bond in 2010, which we developed and applied in the first instance to young prisoners who regularly go back to jail.
So, I mean, what's fascinating in your own experience is really the lesson well learned that the greatest mechanism to achieve social progress is the market. As Bono, a great friend of everyone on this calls and support of ours, has said that, you know, capitalism is not immoral, it's amoral, and it's the market through its discipline, its demand for its results, and its capacity that can lead to social change. And from those early days, Ronnie, you maintained that we are now in the midst of an investment revolution, the consequence of which are as great as the Industrial Revolution and the technological revolution. That's a very, very bold statement. Would you care to just elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge Adam Clayton, Bono's partner, who also shares views and whose name I saw recently. He and I met just a few weeks ago, and Bono has been a fantastic partner in the impact movement and is one of its great leaders.
Hear, hear.
I see three major forces today acting to improve the world. Now, I know we don't often hear optimistic statements of that kind, but bear with me. The first one is a massive change of values. Young people started it, and they didn't want to buy the products of companies that create harm or work for them. It extended to their parents, their families, and so on and so forth. And it became noticed by investors who are today channeling $40 trillion plus of environmental, social, and governance money, ESG as it's called, to achieving impact as well as profit, usually a reduction of harm rather than innovation to achieve solutions are big issues, but nevertheless, for the first time in history, a massive effort to deliver impact as well as profit. The second major change, and it's one you're very familiar with at Venture Wave, is the leaps of technology that we're going through. These leaps of technology are perhaps even greater than those of the microchip initiated, because they build on all of the technological advance of the last 4 or 5 decades. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, the genome and computing coming together, blockchain, enable us to deliver impact globally in ways humanity could never contemplate. And the third, and perhaps the most unexpected for most people today, is transparency on the impacts of individual companies. We are now able to measure in monetary terms the impacts that companies create through their operations on the environment, through their employment on people, and through their products on people and the environment. I want to give you a peep into the future, if I may, Kieran, by just sharing with you some of the insights that come from the work at Harvard Business School, which I'm privileged to chair, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative. And you can all access HBS, IWA, and everything is open source. Use the information to your heart's content. Let's take the operational impact on the environment that companies create. We've set out 3,000 companies' environmental impact in dollar terms. If I say to you that 450 of these companies create more damage in a year than they create in profit, you begin to understand what monetization of impacts does for us. 1,000 of these companies create damage equivalent to a quarter or more of their annual profit. Together, they create $4 trillion worth of damage in a single year. And most importantly, since we're all investors in this school, you can see a correlation has already emerged because of the weight of the ESG money between companies that pollute more and lower stock market valuations. So these three trends together, the changed values, the powerful technological leaks, and the transparency on the impacts of companies, which extend to diversity and advancement, gender equality, and so on and so forth, as well as product impacts on health and on the environment. You can see how these three forces together are just going to disrupt the business models of countless businesses across every sector in a way that Tesla has shown can be done by bringing new technology to the automobile industry. And so that's why I describe it as a revolution. And it's not an exaggeration to say that it will be as extensive and disruptive as the tech revolution on which it is going to build, is already building.
Yes, and I can't help, I'm delighted that you made the point that compliance with ESG values leads to higher company valuations. Lovely bit of subliminal advertising there for Venture Wave. Thank you, Sir Ronnie. Now, if I may, in terms of regulations and transparency, obviously government is most likely to have a role in this. And the point that was made last week was that, you know, regulation is a relatively cost-free, risk-free method for governments to influence public policy outcomes. But how do we ensure, and how confident are you that government intervention, government regulation to drive transparency will stimulate enterprise rather than stifle it?
So the first thing to realize is that this shift to impact transparency has become inevitable, and that it is going to happen with the help of leaders like Ender within the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to come within the next 3 to 5 years. The reason is that this impact data can be shown to be price sensitive. And that's why you see IOSCO, which groups the world's regulators, pushing hard for climate transparency now. That's why you see the EU bringing legislation into place on the transparency provided by investment funds. Why you see the SEC pushing on companies to become transparent about the impact. And why you see IFRS, which is responsible for all financial accounting outside of the United States, considering the establishment of a Sustainable Standards Board this November, right? So everybody's beginning to focus on it because it's price sensitive and it's what trillions of investors' money want. Now, for government, coming out of the COVID crisis with huge indebtedness, with expanded sets of social issues because of higher unemployment, because of the health consequences that we have suffered, and so on. This is an opportunity to bring investors and businesses to their side in achieving their social and environmental goals. And transparency is not something that companies can terribly easily fight today. First of all, it's viewed as a human right in a way. Everywhere, transparency is being recognized. You see it now with what's happening in social media companies like Facebook and so on. Everybody is recognizing that transparency is a very important element in democracy, apart from anything else. Investors want it. Consumers are beginning to use apps, pointing their phones at the good on the supermarket shelf. It may be a box of Twinings tea. And you can find out that Associated British Foods, which made $1.6 billion of profit, created $1.8 billion of environmental damage. And that may change your purchasing decision and shift you to Lipton, which is manufactured by Unilever, which has a much better impact track record. So investors want it, consumers want it, and beginning to access this information. Employees, talent want it. And so government is sitting in between companies that would like to maintain the status quo because the rules of the game of just making profit and not worrying about any of the consequences have enabled them to thrive with their existing business models. And the last thing they want is new competitors coming in and attacking them, or for that matter, regulations forcing them to change the way they do things. And these other constituencies on the other side of government, investors, consumers, talent, pushing for it. And I would ask Enda perhaps in our Q&A session how he sees this tug of war, actually working out, and whether he agrees with the time frame that I'm putting on the table of our discussion today.
So with that in mind, and anxious to get to the Q&A, Ronnie, I have two questions for you. One is to do with the criticisms of impact investing. I mean, the fact is that impact investing is predicated on doing well by doing good. It's good for the investor. It's good for society. You've already pointed out that alignment with ESG values leads to higher company valuations, et cetera, et cetera. That very pillar of impact investing leads to a certain amount of cynicism. There are those who will attempt to dismiss conscientious capitalism as conscience salving, or worse than that, conscious deceit. How do you respond to those charges?
I mean, as an investor, it seems to me self-evident that impact investing will deliver better returns. And I have actually been investing in early stage ventures, and I have evidence of it. It works. Why? First of all, you reduce the risk of regulation and taxation. So we're beginning to talk of a carbon tax now, and transparency will bring us to a fairer tax system. Now, you'll be able to tax companies directly, like through a carbon tax, for the harm they do, rather than taxing everyone for the harm committed by some. So you can already see the risk of taxation impairing the after-tax profits of companies. There's a risk of regulation. I mean, we may actually regulate out the use of coal over time. What are the implications of that if you're holding coal assets? But on the other side, I want to give you a very, very vivid example of how, when you're looking at opportunities, an impact lens leads you to new product market opportunities. And I want to take an example from Impact, which is this company, Orcam, set up by some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world to help the blind. They sold out their previous company, which was in the vision area for self-driving vehicles, for $15 billion to Intel. And they decided 7 years ago to create a pair of spectacles with a memory stick-like device, which whispers into the ear of the wearer the page of the book they're reading or the newspaper, the envelope in their hand recognizes up to 300 people who've previously been inputted. Now, you'd all say, wow, what an amazing impact venture. 35 million blind people in the world, 250 million visually impaired people, 300 million person market. Do good, do well, unbelievable. But in a conversation with the founder, it emerged that if you think as an impact entrepreneur, you ask yourself the question, how can this technology help the greatest number of people on the planet? And you get a very surprising answer, which is, what if you provided these spectacles to the 800 million illiterate adults in the world? What would that do for their lives and livelihoods? What would it do for the global economy to bring 800 million people who can't read to effectively being able to do so? And so all of a sudden, you've defined a $1.1 billion market, person market. And so I believe that impact investment is going to generate superior returns, because it gets us to a higher point on the efficient investment frontier. By optimizing risk, return, and impact, we reduce risk and we increase the opportunity sets.
Yeah. And risk, return, impact define the investment revolution that you've spoken about. Last week, you declared that victory is at hand. How close do you think that victory is, and what will it look like?
Well, I think the big barricade that still remains in the way of the impact revolution is impact transparency and integrity. And we have a historic opportunity now, similar to that which our forebears faced in the early 30s. After the great crash of 29, investors sat up and realized they had been investing in companies which picked their own accounting principles, had no auditors to verify the numbers, and had the ability to put into hidden reserves part of their profit without telling shareholders. Basically, no transparency on profit. And the Roosevelt administration, famously in 33 and 34, established generally accepted accounting principles and the use of auditors. At the time, some people screamed that this would be impossible to do. You couldn't possibly have the same set of accounting principles for every company, irrespective of size and sector. And others screamed that even if you were able to do it, it would spell the end of American capitalism. And with the benefit of hindsight, we understand that our $200 to $300 trillion investment markets today totally depend on the reliability of the data that investors get, the transparency they have. We're at a similar crossroads today, a historic crossroad, with regard to impact transparency, with 40 trillion seeking to achieve impact and no transparency really on the impacts created. Every company just publishes what it wants, very few numbers, very little verified. And so victory is in sight, because I see the data that is being used now about impacts affecting financial markets, affecting valuations. And that is going to force regulators to step in and provide this transparency. Now, if they provide the transparency, not only on environmental, but on social as well, because we know the two are interconnected. Look at what happened with the Gilets jaunes. You try to deal with an environmental issue through a policy which is well-intentioned, and you get fantastic social backlash, because those who are going to pay the increase, the diesel tax, are more vulnerable commuters who feel left behind anyway, because they haven't benefited from the growth that has typically focused on major cities. So if our transparency comes in the form of environmental and social data today, if it is mandatory and not voluntary, and if it comes in the form of impact accounting and not just qualitative reporting, then I really do think that victory is in sight. Because as I say in my book, it will become impossible for businesses to go about trying to make money while ignoring all of the impacts that they create. If you're one of the 450 companies I mentioned creating more damage than profit, and that's there for everyone to see, your customers, your employees, your investors, your governments, then you've built in a mechanism now for shifting our economic system to bring solutions rather than to continue to create and aggravate problems. Well, risk-return impact is actually the answer to these changing values. The values said, we don't want to just make profit and create damage. Risk-return impact then comes along and just says, this is a better way to do business and to invest. It'll deliver better returns, and it will bring solutions to the challenges we face socially and climatically.
Ronnie, thank you. We're almost out of time now. I think on behalf of all of us at this event, the depth of your thinking, the breadth of your thinking, the size of your ambition is truly magnificent. You've lived it, you've animated it, and you continue to lead it. When we were putting together, when we were conceiving of Impact Ireland, I can assure you that your vision, your example, and your prescriptions really helped us put shape on what we want to do, and the objectives that you set for all of us just spur us on to do so much more. So at every level, on behalf of all of us, and on a personal level, on behalf of my colleagues and I, we're most grateful indeed. So with that, can I just hand over to the chairman of our Global Advisory Council, and to Kenny, to formally close proceedings. Thank you, Ronnie.
It's been a privilege to have somebody of the life experience of Ronnie Cohen, but also the life of achievement. And allied to those two building blocks, his vision for the future. For governments to react and to implement the kind of transparency that is required here and that will be demanded by the young generation requires resilience and courage and a capacity to lead. Sadly, it's not evident in many places around the world. And I do hope that from our own perspective here, we implement what we have said we will do. So thank you again, Ronnie. It's been our privilege. Godspeed you, and give you good health and continued good fortune in the time ahead. We all appreciate your attendance very much.
Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you all. Bye-bye.